The Galactic Council believed that humans were reckless, unpredictable, and far too dangerous to be left unchecked. Humanity had spread into space at an alarming rate, surviving in conditions where other species had perished. Worse still, they had defeated superior alien forces in battle, not because of technology, but because of sheer ruthlessness and adaptability. That terrified the Council. So, they devised a plan. They wouldn't risk open war. That was too costly, and humans had a way of turning wars into massacres. Instead, they would take a more scientific approach. They would capture a human soldier, alive. The setup. Deep in the Proxima system, the Council orchestrated a flawless trap. They created a distress signal, one designed to be irresistible to any human operative. It was broadcast from an abandoned supply station orbiting an asteroid, a perfect spot for an ambush. The signal was simple, a garbled transmission, supposedly from a stranded human survivor. Ship down. Heavy casualties. Hostiles in pursuit. Requesting immediate extraction. To any other species, it was just static. To a human, it was a call for help. The Council's Intelligence Division analyzed human military doctrine and behavior. Their conclusion? Humans never abandoned their own. They would always try to recover a fallen soldier or save a stranded ally. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait. The strike team consisted of the Council's best, hunter teams, shock troopers, and stealth drones. The hunter teams were fast, lethal assassins trained in close-quarters combat. The shock troopers were massive, heavily armored warriors, immune to small arms fire and built for direct engagement. The stealth drones would map the terrain and track their prey in real time. With so much firepower, capturing a human soldier alive should have been easy. It would be the biggest mistake they ever made. The arrival of the ghost. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, their sensors picked up movement. A single human ship, a sleek black stealth transport, drifted into the system, barely emitting any signals. The pilot was cautious, scanning for threats. But they had planned for this. The station still looked like a legitimate distress beacon, and the system was quiet. Then, the ship moved. A single drop pod shot out from the underbelly of the vessel, rocketing toward the abandoned station. It burned through the asteroid's thin atmosphere and smashed into the rocky surface in a controlled descent. The impact kicked up dust and debris. Silence followed. The Council's forces waited, weapons ready. Their drones hovered overhead, scanning the wreckage. Then, movement. A figure emerged from the drop pod, clad in matte black combat armor, helmet reflecting nothing. The suit was tight to his body, with no visible rank or insignia. He carried a rifle slung across his chest and a combat knife strapped to his thigh. His stance was relaxed. Too relaxed. The Council's commander, an insectoid named Vraxis, sneered. The human had no idea what he had just walked into. Springing the trap. Vraxis spoke into his communicator. Advance. The hunters moved first, 12 elite soldiers, their bodies modified for agility and silent movement. They spread out, moving through the rocky terrain, keeping their distance. Standard doctrine dictated that the moment they had visual confirmation, they would deploy the containment field. The human didn't move. He was just standing there. One of the hunters moved in closer, taking aim with his tranquilizer rifle. They had to take the human alive. The shot lined up. The hunter's trigger finger tightened. A gunshot rang out. The hunter's skull exploded. His body collapsed instantly, twitching. Vraxis' mandibles clicked in confusion. The human had barely moved. How had he? Another shot. Another hunter dropped. Return fire. Vraxis snarled. The remaining hunters opened fire with their energy weapons. Bright plasma bolts streaked across the rocky terrain, blasting apart the boulders where the human had stood. But he wasn't there anymore. The first mistake. One of the hunters turned, scanning the darkness behind him. A black-gloved hand grabbed his throat, crushing his windpipe instantly. His weapon clattered to the ground as a combat knife punched through his armor, sliding into his heart. The hunter choked on his own blood as the human let his body drop without a sound. Panic spread through the Council's forces. This wasn't a normal human soldier. This wasn't some infantryman lost behind enemy lines. This was something else. The hunters started retreating, switching to infrared vision, but the human was already moving faster than they could track. A third body hit the ground. Then a fourth. Every time they turned, the human was gone, his movements like a phantom in the dark. Then they heard his voice. Cold. Controlled. Amused. You're not hunters. A plasma bolt fired wildly into the night. It hit nothing. Your prey. The slaughter began. The council realizes their mistake. Vraxis gripped the edges of the command console as he watched the biosignatures of his men disappear. "Deploy the shock troopers," he barked. 6 hulking warriors marched forward, each one clad in impenetrable exo-armor, built to withstand everything short of an orbital strike. "Kill him," Vraxis ordered. The shock troopers opened fire, sending a storm of plasma rounds into the ruins. Entire sections of the asteroid exploded under the assault. There was no way anything could have survived. Silence followed. Then, a voice, crackling over their own radio frequency. "That all you got?" The first shock trooper turned too late. A combat knife punched into the gap in his armor, slipping beneath the helmet and severing the spinal cord. He collapsed instantly. The second one swung around with a massive plasma cannon, but the human was already moving. He fired, a single precise shot into the weapon's energy core. Boom! The cannon exploded, taking the trooper's arm with it. The alien screamed, falling to his knees, before a bullet tore through his forehead, silencing him forever. The remaining 4 turned and ran. But Cross was already behind them. The third was dropped with a headshot before he made it 3 steps. The fourth tripped over a corpse, only to have a boot slam onto his chest, pinning him down. A blade flashed, and his throat opened up. The fifth tried to radio for help. A bullet shattered his helmet before he could finish the transmission. Only one remained. The last shock trooper collapsed to his knees, weapon discarded. He looked up as the human stepped forward, his gun raised. "Please," the alien choked out. "Mercy." The human stared down at him for a long moment. Then he pulled the trigger. Conclusion: a different kind of war. Vraxis watched in horror from the command center. His entire force, gone. This wasn't a simple retrieval mission anymore. This was a war. And the council had just made a fatal mistake. They hadn't captured a human soldier. They had hunted a Navy SEAL. And now, he was hunting them. The Galactic Council had underestimated their target, a mistake that was already costing them lives. The hunters they sent into the ruins had been some of the finest assassins the Council had ever trained, yet in less than 5 minutes, they had been reduced to corpses. Now, the survivors were scrambling for cover, their precision tactics unraveling into sheer panic. And Commander Ryan Cross was just getting started. The aftermath of the first ambush. The rocky terrain around the outpost was littered with bodies. Some of the hunters had bullet wounds in their skulls, their helmets blown apart with deadly precision. Others lay motionless, their throats slit so cleanly that they hadn't even had time to scream. The few that remained were backing up toward the cliffs, weapons scanning every shadow. Vraxis, the commander overseeing the operation from his orbital warship, watched the slaughter unfold in stunned silence. The human had killed 7 elite operatives without taking a single shot in return. How? One of his officers stammered. How is this possible? The answer was simple. The council had expected a normal human soldier. They had no idea they were facing one of the most dangerous killers in the galaxy. Cross was a Navy SEAL, trained in stealth, ambush tactics, and asymmetrical warfare. He didn't just fight. He hunted. And now, the hunters had become his prey. The sniper's patience. Cross crouched behind a broken section of the supply station, his rifle steady against his shoulder. He had switched to a high-powered sniper configuration, utilizing the stolen plasma rifle he had modified from one of the dead hunters. Through the scope, he watched his targets, 4 remaining hunters, their movements jerky and panicked. They were scanning the terrain with their multivision optics, trying to spot him before he struck again. But Cross wasn't going to make it easy for them. He was patient. The first rule of a sniper wasn't just about aiming. It was about control. Control of your breathing, your positioning, your emotions. You didn't just fire when you saw the enemy, you fired when it was the perfect shot. A hunter stepped into his crosshairs. Cross exhaled slowly. Pulled the trigger. Flop. A flash of blue light. The energy round punched straight through the alien's visor, vaporizing the back of his skull in an instant. The body collapsed, twitching, the weapon clattering uselessly onto the rock. The remaining 3 hunters spun around, weapons up. Too late. Cross had already moved. A seal in the shadows. The hunters fired wildly, sending bright plasma streaks into the darkness. The glowing projectiles exploded against the rocks, sending debris flying in all directions. But Cross was gone. Moving low, silent, and fast, he circled around them. Their breathing was heavy, their movements clumsy. They weren't used to being on the defensive. Cross was. One of the hunters turned, his nerves on edge, just in time to feel a hand wrap around his throat. He let out a choking gasp, struggling, but Cross clamped down hard. Then, the knife. A smooth, brutal strike, straight into the weak spot between the armor plates. The alien convulsed, blood pouring from his neck, his gurgled scream cut short as Cross twisted the blade. Two left. Fear spreads like fire. The last two hunters backed up until they were almost standing back to back. Their weapons trembled in their grips. "Commander," one of them shouted over comms. "We're being..." Cross fired from the darkness. The plasma round ripped through the speaker's chest, blowing a hole clean through him. The last hunter stood frozen, breathing heavily, terrified. He tried to run. Cross was on him instantly. A hand grabbed the back of his helmet and slammed him face first into a boulder. The alien groaned in agony, his visor cracking under the impact. Cross didn't let go. He yanked the hunter backward, spinning him around, then drove a knife deep into his gut. The alien screamed. Cross pulled him in close, his voice calm, controlled. "You should have stayed in your ship." Then, he ripped the blade upward, slicing straight through armor, bone, and organs. The last hunter dropped lifelessly to the ground. Vraxis panics. On board the orbital command ship, Vraxis was losing his mind. What do you mean all hunters are dead?" he roared. "Sir, we..." A new voice interrupted. A human voice. "You there, Vraxis?" The room fell dead silent. Vraxis' mandibles clicked in shock. The human, Cross, was speaking over their own communication channels. How did he get into our system?" one of the officers gasped. Vraxis forced himself to stay calm. "You have no escape, human. We have your position locked." A cold chuckle echoed over the speakers. "You think I'm trapped in here with you?" A pause. "No, Vraxis. You're trapped in here with me." Then, static. The transmission cut out. Vraxis felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping through his body. Fear. The shock troopers deploy. Realizing that this was no ordinary human, Vraxis abandoned all plans of taking Cross alive. "No more games," he snarled. "Send in the shock troopers." Within seconds, 6 massive figures stepped out of the dropships. Each one stood 8 feet tall, clad in thick exo-armor, carrying heavy plasma weapons designed to wipe out entire squads in a single barrage. They were the most heavily armed soldiers in the Council's arsenal. Their orders? Exterminate the human. The ground shook as they marched into the ruins, their armor humming with energy. Their scanners picked up the wreckage of the hunters, the bodies still warm. One of them activated a thermal scan. There. A single heat signature. Hiding in the shadows. Target acquired, one of them rumbled. The leader raised his cannon. "Kill him." The human's response. Cross watched from cover. His rifle was useless against armor that thick. His knife would be suicide in a frontal attack. He had 2 options. Try to run. Not his style. Adapt. Overcome. Kill. Cross chose option 2. He reached down, activating the stolen comm device he had pulled from one of the dead hunters. Then, speaking into the Galactic Council's own encrypted frequency, he uttered one sentence. "You sent the wrong guys." Then he made his move. The Galactic Council had made their next move, and it was a big one. Cross crouched in the shadows, his mind running at full speed as he watched 6 heavily armed shock troopers spread out through the ruins. Their armor was thick enough to withstand anti-vehicle rounds, and their weapons could turn an entire platoon into scorched corpses in seconds. And yet, they had one fatal flaw. They were expecting a soldier. They had no idea they were hunting a Navy SEAL. Cross had spent years outwitting, outmaneuvering, and outkilling enemies just like this. Overconfident, well-equipped, and completely unprepared for what was coming. The first kill. Cross stayed still, watching. One of the shock troopers walked a few paces ahead of his squad, his weapon scanning for movement. The others stayed in formation, their visors glowing red, sweeping their surroundings. They were good. Disciplined. Efficient. But Cross was better. He moved like a shadow, circling around their formation until he was directly behind their rear guard. The alien's massive frame was covered in thick plates of exo-armor, but every system had its weak points. Cross moved in fast. His knife came down hard, not against the armor, but against the flexible joint between the plates. The blade sank deep. The shock trooper let out a garbled snarl, his body locking up. Cross didn't hesitate. He grabbed the alien's massive energy cannon, wrenched it free, and before the others could react, he fired. The plasma lit up the night, blasting through the closest trooper's head like a sledgehammer through glass. 2 down. 4 left. The trap. The remaining troopers immediately swung their weapons around, firing blindly toward Cross's position. But Cross was already gone. He sprinted low and fast, weaving through the wreckage, using every shadow, every rock, every shattered wall to his advantage. Make them nervous. Make them second-guess. Make them waste shots. Plasma fire tore through the ruins, the shock troopers unleashing hell. But they weren't just shooting at Cross anymore. They were shooting at nothing. And that's when he struck again. Cross had set a trap. One of the bodies from his earlier kills had been rigged with explosives. As the shock troopers moved in, scanning for him, one of them stepped too close. The moment his foot hit the ground. Boom. The charge detonated, sending a shockwave of flaming shrapnel in all directions. Cross had calculated it perfectly. One trooper was blown in half, his body flung into a broken supply crate. The other was sent crashing into a rock wall, his armor sparking, his breathing labored. Now there were two left. Vraxis watches in horror. Up in the orbital command ship, Vraxis was losing what little control he had left. His best hunters were gone. His shock troopers, the most feared warriors in the Council's military, were being butchered like livestock. The bridge was silent. No one dared to speak. Vraxis' claws gripped the console, his mandibles clicking in agitation. This isn't possible, one of his officers stammered. Vraxis' voice was low and shaking with rage. You're not fighting a man. He inhaled sharply. You're fighting a monster. The last two. Cross moved quickly, adjusting his position before the two surviving shock troopers could regroup. One of them was injured, still recovering from the explosion. The other had taken cover, his massive cannon aimed at the open ground ahead of him. Cross needed leverage. He spotted an overhanging rock formation and climbed fast, moving with the precision of a predator. The moment was perfect. The injured trooper staggered forward, his armor cracked, his movement sluggish. Cross dropped from above. A brutal strike to the throat, then a shot straight into the visor. The trooper collapsed instantly. One left. The final duel. The last trooper had seen enough. He wasn't going to be hunted down like the others. He roared something in his alien tongue, leveling his cannon at Cross. Cross moved like lightning. A single, well-aimed shot hit the weapon's power core. Boom. The cannon exploded in the trooper's hands, sending him staggering backward. His armor smoldered, his breathing ragged. Cross didn't give him a chance to recover. He charged. The fight turned brutal. The trooper swung a massive armored fist at Cross's head. Cross ducked low, countering with a vicious strike to the alien's knee joint. The alien stumbled. Cross tackled him full force, driving him into the dirt, his knife flashing. The trooper grabbed Cross's wrist, stopping the blade inches from his throat. The two locked eyes. The alien snarled in defiance. Cross grinned. And then, he pulled his sidearm. One final shot. Straight between the eyes. The trooper's body went limp. All six were dead. The message. Cross stood up slowly, breathing heavily. His armor was scratched, his body sore, but he had barely broken a sweat. He grabbed the helmet from one of the shock troopers and activated the Council's communication channel. The bridge of Vrax's ship was dead silent. Then, the speakers crackled to life. That the best you got? Vrax's mandibles clicked violently. You. I hope not. A pause. Because now it's my turn. Then the line went dead. Vrax's last gambit. Vraxis had had enough. The human wasn't just a threat. He was an extinction-level disaster. Launch the orbital strike, he hissed. His officers turned in shock. But, sir, we were ordered to. I don't care. Vraxis slammed his fist on the control panel. Wipe that outpost off the face of the planet. The warship's cannons began powering up. A massive energy charge built in the ship's core, preparing to unleash a blast that would annihilate everything within a 5-mile radius. On the planet below, Cross saw the sky start to glow. He narrowed his eyes. So that's how you want to play it? Fine. Time for Phase 2. The sky was burning. Cross watched as the Council warship's cannons powered up, the glow of their energy build-up turning the night into a deep, eerie crimson. The orbital strike was coming. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before everything around him would be vaporized. Cross didn't panic. He'd survived airstrikes, artillery barrages, and kill zones designed to turn men into dust. The Council thought they had cornered him. They had no idea he had planned for this. This was where the real fight began. Evacuation is for the weak. Most soldiers in his position would be running for an escape route. Cross wasn't most soldiers. He wasn't going to run. He was going to turn this battlefield into hell. The Council wanted to bomb him off the map? Fine. But he wasn't dying alone. The warship's fatal flaw. Orbital bombardments were devastating, but they weren't instantaneous. A warship had to stabilize its targeting systems, cycle its energy banks, and ensure its own troops weren't caught in the blast. And that meant Cross had a window. Not much of one, but enough. He opened the shock trooper's helmet, linked into the Council's encrypted network, and started scanning for something useful. Then he found it. A classified emergency command override. The warship's shield controls. Cross's grin was cold and deadly. The Council thought they had a god's view of the battlefield. He was about to show them what hell looked like from the other side. The ambush from the dead. Vraxis stood on the command bridge, fuming. He should have been celebrating. The human should have been dead by now. Instead, the battle was slipping out of control. Orbital strike status, he snapped. His weapons officer turned, uneasy. 80 seconds until full charge. Not fast enough. Vraxis clenched his mandibles. Increase output. Then the alarms blared. Unauthorized access detected. What? Boom. A Council dropship exploded mid-air, its engines rupturing as its own weapons detonated inside the hull. Then another. Then another. A full squadron of reinforcements, gone in an instant. Vraxis' claws dug into the console. What is happening? One of his officers stared in horror at the tactical display. Sir, our shields. The orbital defense grid was failing. A small, encrypted signal had been injected into the warship systems. And one by one, the Council's safety measures collapsed. Someone was inside their network. A SEAL's arsenal. Cross moved like a phantom through the battlefield, planting detonators, hacking command beacons, and turning the Council's own weapons against them. By the time their ground troops realized what was happening, it was too late. The targeting beacons for the orbital strike had been switched. Now? The warship was aiming at its own reinforcements. Friendly fire is a bitch. Vraxis could do nothing but watch as his forces burned. Council gunships, armored vehicles, and elite warriors, all caught in their own orbital strike. Fire rained down. Plasma waves consumed entire battalions. Hundreds of his best warriors were obliterated in an instant. Vraxis' mandibles clicked erratically as he slammed his fist into the control panel. Cancel the bombardment. Cancel it now. But it was too late. The warship's death sentence. Cross wasn't done. With the Council in disarray, he activated the last part of his plan. A signal flare shot into the sky, and a long-dormant beacon deep within the ruins activated. Miles away, buried beneath the planet's crust, a hidden payload woke up. It was a fail-safe left behind by the last resistance forces before they were wiped out. A warhead. Big enough to level a mountain. And now? It was locked onto the Council's warship. Cross sent one final command. And then, the missile launched. Vraxis' final moments. The bridge of the warship erupted in chaos. Sir, we have an incoming projectile. Shoot it down. I can't. Our defenses are. Boom. The warhead struck the warship like the hammer of a vengeful god. The explosion ripped through the hull, tearing through its engines, its reactors, its core. The entire command bridge shook violently, and the last thing Vraxis saw was the fiery light consuming everything around him. Then, silence. The once mighty Council warship, the pinnacle of its fleet, was reduced to debris, raining down upon the planet like falling stars. Cross walks away. On the ground, Cross watched the firestorm in the sky. The battlefield was a graveyard. The Council's forces? Gone. Their warship? Destroyed. And him? Still breathing. He took a slow, deep breath and turned away, walking into the ruins as the embers of war flickered behind him. He hadn't just won. He had annihilated them. And somewhere, in the darkest corners of the galaxy, the Council would remember this day. The day they tried to capture a human soldier, unaware he was a Navy SEAL. The battlefield was silent. The warship, once a monument of power, was now a grave in the sky. Its debris rained down like falling stars, its warriors burned away in their own fire. And at the center of it all, one man walked away. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Cross could feel it. The Council wasn't done with him. And that was fine. Because he wasn't done with them either. Echoes of death. Cross moved through the ruins, his body aching but steady. The smoke, the fire, the wreckage, all of it felt like a memory now. He had been in so many wars, so many battlefields. But this one? This one had a message. The council thought they were untouchable. They thought a lone human was just another target. They were wrong. He was the hunter. And now? They were the prey. A hunter never rests. Cross's instinct flared. Something was coming. He dropped to one knee, rifle raised, heartbeat slow. The air was too still. The wind carried a sound, metal shifting, armor scraping. Survivors. And they weren't just any survivors. Elite hunters. Cross recognized the pattern of their movements, the deliberate spread, the silence between steps. They weren't just after him. They were here to erase him. Death comes in the shadows. Cross vanished into the ruins, blending into the blackened skeleton of the battlefield. A lesser soldier would have panicked. A lesser warrior would have run. Cross? He set the trap. The first council commando moved through the rubble, scanning. Their armor was sleek, reinforced, built for infiltration and assassination. They didn't realize they were already dead. Cross waited. And when the commando passed, his knife flashed. The blade slid between the armor plates, severing the alien's spine. No scream. Just a silent collapse. One down. Hunting the hunters. The second commando felt it. Something was wrong. They signaled to the others, moving faster, scanning harder. Cross was already ahead of them. He moved like a wraith, circling the battlefield, using their own tactics against them. They relied on advanced technology. Cross relied on instinct. A third commando moved past a ruined plasma turret. Cross was already waiting. He didn't use a bullet. He used a garrote. The alien struggled, ***, claws scratching, limbs twitching, ***, but Cross didn't let go. He never let go. 2 down. The last mistake. The remaining commandos broke formation. That was the fatal mistake. Cross moved through the dark, one with the ruins. One by one. They fell. A snapped neck. A knife to the heart. A rifle shot through the visor. The last one tried to flee. Cross didn't let him. He tackled the alien to the ground, pinning him, knife to throat. And then, he let him live. For one reason. To send a message. The legend begins. Cross leaned in, his voice cold, steady, final. Tell them. The alien's mandibles trembled. Tell them, what? Cross's grip tightened. Tell the council. Tell them about me. He let go. The alien staggered back, gasping, running. It would take him weeks to reach a secure channel. But the story would spread. And when it did, the entire galaxy would know the truth. The council tried to capture a human soldier. They had no idea he was a Navy SEAL. And now? They never would again.